Hello, and thank you for listening to RENEWables, a podcast by BioStar, which aims to explore the current and future energy landscape in America.
Welcome back to RENEWables. I'm your host, David Smart, Senior Vice President of Sales at BioStar RENEWables, and I am honored to have Robin Saluoks, the CEO of eAgronom, on the podcast today. This is Robin is coming to us from Estonia, certainly our first guest from Estonia, and very, very excited and appreciative of you coming on the show. Robin, thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and really glad to be here.
Absolutely. I was so interested in your company, eAgronom, and what you all are doing, sort of related to carbon sequestration, carbon credits, and enabling farmers to sort of maximize their business model. So we're going to get into all of that today. I want to hear it from you, though, first. Tell our listeners and viewers about yourself and your background and how you came to be the CEO of eAgronom.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually coming from the farming family. So my father has around 3,000-acre organic grain farm in South Estonia, and but I studied computer science myself in the university. So eAgronom for me was opportunity to put those two worlds together. And in 2016, my father started looking for a new tool to manage the farm. Didn't find anything good in the market, and I ended up developing it on my own. But already, and then some other farmers picked it up as well, and that's how it started growing as a farm management software. But from the day one, we had a function called humus balance calculator included to the system. So humus is the richest part of the soil. 40% of this is carbon, and that function was something that no farmer asked from us, but my father. And that wasn't the reason why farmers paid for our tooling, but it was important for us. We just wanted to give this context to farmers that if they do some changes in their practices, how their humus balance is changing, and are they sequestering more carbon in the soil, or are they having less carbon and humus and nutrients in the soil after that. So from the day one, it was clear for us that we wanted to find a way how to get farmers to apply more regenerative practices. And then 2 years ago, we launched the carbon program, and that was our way to really finalize and or really get started with our vision and really pursue that part of saving the soils.
Awesome. Do you talk about your business model and just kind of set the stage, I guess, at the highest level? What does eAgronom do? And then we'll dig in a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are bringing economic benefits to sustainable farmers. So I guess it's quite clear that farmers, they're happy to change practices toward more regenerative, but it has to be already short-term profitable for them. Everybody knows about long-term benefits, but there has to be some short-term benefits as well. And I guess the good news is also that there are some stakeholders who are happy to incentivize sustainable farming. Some corporations want to offset their emissions, so they would like to give money to farmers to sequester carbon in the soil. Banks want to incentivize sustainable businesses and coming to their portfolio. And already, if you buy electric car, you get better terms from the bank. Same is happening with farms. Farmers or banks would like to give better terms to farmers who are applying sustainable practices. Food companies, most of the big food companies have their sustainability targets different companies, different years, but all of them want to reach carbon neutral food line. And same with landlords as well. They want to take care of their land, and they're ready to give slightly better terms to farmers who manage the soils well. So all those stakeholders would like to incentivize and support regenerative farming, but they lack the ability to verify which farmer is sustainable and what are the emissions in the farm and so on. And this is where we come in with our software and our tooling. And the main focus is on the carbon program, where we bring extra income to farmers who change their practices, sequester more carbon in the soil. We turn this data then into carbon credits, and those carbon credits are bought by some big corporations who want to offset their emissions, and we take a cut from the credits then.
Fabulous. Regenerative agriculture is a topic that we love to talk about on the show. BioStar is in the business of producing an organic fertilizer from a variety of waste streams, mostly manure, but also from food waste as well. So this is really hitting the nail on the head for the show. We haven't talked a ton about carbon credits, though. And so I want you to just kind of educate our listeners and viewers on carbon credits. But before we do that, I have to ask, is organic farming a big deal in Estonia? You mentioned your father has a 3,000 acre organic farm. That's, I think, or was it 300? I apologize.
3,000.
3,000 acres. That's a big organic farm. So talk first just a little bit about organic farming in Estonia, and are more people transitioning to organics? I'm super interested in that.
Absolutely. I think in European Union, if you look like percentage of the total farming land, then Estonia is in the second place in European Union to have like a percentage of organic land after Austria. So but the organic farming is quite big in Estonia, and it's really beautiful. In a way, you have to think even more in organic farm because you cannot fix your mistakes by just adding some more fertilizers or just adding some crop protection products. But you really have to think, okay, if I have this disease or this insect coming to the field, then how will I change the crop rotation, or how I will change my cultivation practices to make sure that this disease won't be a problem? Because always those disease and weeds and bugs, they tell a story about what's wrong on the field. And so that's like building organic grain farm or managing it in is quite a challenge, and requires a lot of work and thinking. But many farmers are following that path, and in European Union there are quite a good grants as well, subsidies that direct farmers more toward organic. At the same time, well, there are some really ambitious targets from the European Union level, but since there's more and more organic farms, then on some years, I think it was 2 years ago or a year ago, organic grain price and conventional grain price was quite same already. So you had so much offering, but so there are some growth challenges, but I guess in the end it will all play out quite well, because like the food production is much more efficient in the organic farm. Even though, by the way, my grandfather is conventional farmer, so I'm not against using chemicals, and that's fine. But for me, the organic farming is more beautiful, because you have to think more how to use the nature in your advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't just throw a pesticide on and solve the problem. And it's interesting because a lot of times when we talk to organic farmers who do both, they have the same sentiment that you do, but also they find, I think, that sometimes making a quick reaction with a pesticide or an herbicide, whatever it may be, sometimes can lead to other issues. And so that's super interesting. Do you mind me asking what specifically, what are some of the crops that your father's growing on that farm?
Yeah, quite regular ones like wheat and rye, but also some legumes like pea and bean, and some oil crops like canola or rapeseed oil, and then uses white clover. So basically, he has 7-year crop rotation, and 2 years is just white clover or red clover. He's using a lot of undercropping. I think all of the crops beside pea and bean have some undercrop. And then after harvesting the main crop, this becomes like a cover crop until he seeds another crop again for the next season.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is super interesting. In 3,000 acres, that's a big organic farm. So super impressive. And if I'm ever in Estonia, I will certainly look you up and would love to see the farm. So talk about carbon credits, educate our listeners and viewers who might not be as familiar with what a carbon credit really is, and talk about how specifically farmers can benefit from them.
Yeah. So first of all, well, even more widely, I think there will be several benefits for sustainable farmers. So one of those is carbon credits, but in the future there will be already access to better loan terms as well. We're working with few banks in Europe right now, and that also the food prices will be better, and etc. So there will be some other benefits as well. And carbon credit is really specific one. So it's basically, in a way, one of the misunderstanding has been that it's like a second yield in a year. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So it's not that big of an extra income, but it's more like a health insurance for your soil. So it helps to cover all the costs and to improve your soil. And the biggest benefits then come later from reduced fertilization needs and healthier crops. But how it works is that there are some big companies, or bigger and smaller one actually, who are at first reducing their emissions, but it's very difficult for them to get to zero emissions. So what they do then is that they offset the remaining emissions, and they offset it by giving money to someone else to remove then the CO2 from the atmosphere. And someone else might be farmers who then have to change practices and sequester more carbon in the soil. And there are really, big carbon credits are becoming more and more mainstream. So I wanted to say it's like a really new industry, but it has been actually around already for many years. Just now it's becoming big. Voluntary carbon market, this right now is the size of the market is $2 billion. It used to be, I think, less than a year ago, it was 1 billion or something like this, and it's growing very rapidly. And by 2050, it's expected to grow to 50 billion a year, the market size. So the market is really big, but since it's still emerging, then there are now there are different types of credits. Some have some tougher rules, some don't have that tough rules. But what we are working with is Verra. Verra is a global carbon credit certifier. They are basically, they have methodologies explaining what rules you have to follow to actually create those credits. And then if you follow those rules, then they have third parties who will verify that you did everything correctly. And in the end, you can say that now you have Verra certified credits. And why this is important is that, well, even more than half of those, this voluntary carbon credit market is certified by Verra. So if you want to be sure that your credits have some value, then it makes sense to have some strong, credible certifier. There are some others as well, like Gold Standard and some more, but it makes sense to follow those tougher rules because then you can be certain that there is actually a market for your credits as well. And those rules are something like, first of all, it has to be additional. So if farmer already did some activity, then you cannot get credits for this. Also, if some practice is common practice in the region, then you can, or it's illegal not to do this practice, then so that's the additionality clause. Secondly, there shouldn't be any leakage, meaning that your change shouldn't influence something else negatively. So let's imagine that all farmers in Estonia would start planting trees on the farming land. That would mean that in some other region, farmers are incentivized to grow food more intensively and emit more emissions. So, and this is considered then leakage. So our farmers shouldn't drop their yields. The yield should be 95% same. And all the models have to be scientifically validated and etc. So there are a lot of rules behind it.
Very interesting. I really appreciate you laying that out there for us and explaining it. You did a great job of explaining that. As we were preparing for the episode, we talked about this concept of a prepaid carbon credit program. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, well, the thing is that it's a bit like with grain. So you have to do practice changes today. Farmers, they have to buy seed to cover crop, and they have to invest today. And then there's a farming season. The carbon is actually sequestered. Then it might take a year to get credits certified, and then maybe a year to get them sold. So it's likely that from actually doing the first investment to getting credits sold, it takes 3 years. Well, for some farmers, it's okay, but for other farmers, they need some of the cash already upfront. So what we do is that half of the sellable credits, we are ready to pre-purchase from farmers if farmer wishes. And so we give them money in advance, and then in the end, just they will get the half of the credits they can sell later once they are ready, and then the other half they have already sold to us in upfront. Currently around 30 to 40% of the farmers are using that option.
Excellent. So it's a way to sort of get some funds up front so that you can do the things necessary. And we're really familiar at BioStar. We're developing some renewable gas projects, and that would be an interesting concept if you could figure out a way to apply it to the LCFS gas market. There's a really long lag time from the time that you actually make the gas and sell it into the market and ultimately receive that credit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really interesting program that you all have. Talk about, I guess, some of the things we discussed. You know, if you're a farmer looking into carbon credits and, you know, some of these opportunities, should they be weary? What are some of the challenges and what are some of the things that farmers need to be weary of or conscious of, I guess, as they go and explore their options in this, as you know, emerging market?
Yeah, absolutely. So and that is actually one of the challenges right now of the market because the well, I think United States is developing. I know that the European Union is developing a framework. Okay, what is carbon credit? But currently, that kind of framework, it's not that clear. There is no like a standard, some like there is a global accounting standard for publicly traded companies or something like this. There will be those kinds of standards, and then it will be easier. But today there aren't. And our approach has been that we currently try to apply the highest standards, and then later, if we need to lower it, then that's fine. But at least that we know that we are above the bar. And this is the biggest risk, I guess, for farmers is, okay, they go to some carbon program, they're promised some income, and then they do all the changes and so on. But the program will start producing credits that after a few years don't have any value. So this is the biggest risk, I guess. And farmers understand this risk as well. And that's why we have also seen that this prepayment option is super important. Not only for those farmers who use it, but also for other farmers to know it's there, because they feel and they understand that there is a real thing behind it, and we are actually ready to put money on the table and give it to them, compared to some other options where it's unclear if they actually I guess the most challenging carbon programs or something to really be like afraid of are the ones where farmer would have to sell their credits on their own as well. I think this will be quite tricky. Maybe in the future there will be a good market, and that's very easy. But currently the carbon credit is so wide term that they might end up with some so-called asset that doesn't have any value, and then it's difficult for them to sell it. In our cases, yeah, we have those kind of three options. First of all, farmer can pre-sell, or farmer can sell later through eAgronom, or farmer, they can keep credits as well if they want. For example, if they want to offset their own emissions from some other place.
So we have definitely some farmers that listen to the show. What are your tips for those farmers if they're just sort of getting into this and starting to evaluate different carbon farming programs?
Yeah. And those, I would assume that those farmers are mainly in North America, right? So
and that's one of my questions is do you work all over the world or just in Europe, or who can access your platform?
Yeah, well, we are working mainly in Europe and Africa, and actually we have seen some other players as well who at first, and that was our thinking also at first, that let's do it very globally. But now we see all players somehow start to choose, okay, which region they focus first. So we have chosen Europe and Africa. And there are some other players in North America. Some players who seem credible, obviously I don't know the details and so on, who are in North America, are SIBO, Indigo Ag, and Agoro. Agoro is carbon program by Yara. So I don't know the details, but I think these three are something to look into. And they also, well, what's important, or what's I guess the threshold to us, is that all of those three are looking to create certified credits as well. Really something that will have value in the future. Obviously, I don't know details where they are and how far they are with this, but at least the goal is right. So these would be the first three carbon programs I would look into.
And I presume if there's any European or African farmers listening, then they should just call you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They can call us. In Africa, actually, I think there are some other companies also, but I can't recommend any. I don't know any by heart. In Europe, I think those at least two of those companies who I mentioned, they used to like play around in Europe as well, but it seems that not anymore. Because I think they understood something that we also understood, that the focus matters right now. It's quite complex to develop a carbon program, and you cannot do it worldwide from the day one. Later, obviously, our goal is also to come to North America and South America and so on. And then I guess we have to find our angle and understand, okay, when they have the first mover advantage, what's the extra value that we can bring. But right now, in Europe and Africa, farmers can easily write to us in eAgronom.com.
Well, you can tell I'm not afraid to shamelessly plug our guests. That's why you're here. And so, before we kind of shift a little bit, tell me a little more, dig in a little deeper to the technology and the role of data and how you really make this possible.
Well, carbon credits are data. Many of the farmers like to say that, oh, that's nice. That's the first time when they ever got paid for air, but in reality, they're getting paid for data, and well, obviously behind this data are real actions, but without putting the data together, there won't be any carbon credits. So there are a few things that matter. One thing is data verification, making sure that the data farmers present us is correct. So for this, we use cross verification from different sources, like some sensors, some satellite integrations, and then machinery telematics, getting the data together to verify that the crops that farmers said that are growing on the field are actually the crops, and the correct cropping is happening, and etc. So that's one thing we have to verify, that there is a right that we have the right data. And the second part are models. So models like the tractor fuel emission models, these are simple. Quite it's very clear how the emissions work over there. But soil is much more complex, and over there Verra has also quite a tough standards. So first of all, you have to choose a soil model that is like a public soil model, peer reviewed, and really scientific. Then you have to validate this with regional peer-reviewed studies. There are some studies done in this region where you want to do the project, and these studies also show that your soil model is working. And then after this, you have to do on the certain fields, you have to do very heavy soil sampling as well. So in the beginning of the project, and then after 5 years and after 10 years, to validate that inside of the project also your soil model is still working. So yeah, that's these are the two, and then based on this, you put together the model, because these are the two things that influence the outcome most. Is the data correct? And then is the model correct?
Carbon credits are data. I've never thought of it that way. I like the way you stated that. Tell me, what types of farmers can participate in these programs?
Well, in general, I guess all farmers. One of the criticisms and challenges of the carbon credits specifically is that when farmer has already been really innovative and applying regenerative practices in the past, then it might be difficult to find some additional activities. Like, let's say with my father, he was applying. He had a crop rotation before. He was cover cropping a lot already, and so on. He still found a few places to improve, but that's the biggest. Like in a way, those farmers who are already those front runners, it's more difficult for them to join the carbon program. But at the same time, we have many of them as well, because they usually still find some step forward. And then the other thing is that we are already working on bringing some other benefits to them, like better interest rates. I was just on a stage yesterday with one of like head of CEO of Swedbank Estonia, and Swedbank is one of the biggest banks in Scandinavia. So he said that maybe it's gonna be in 5 years, maybe later, but at one point farmers and the other companies as well who are not sustainable won't get the loan from the bank anymore, because banks want to reshape their loan portfolios. And so there will be some other benefits as well to other types of farmers as well. But in general, carbon program is for all types of farmers. So we work mainly with crop farmers and mixed farmers.
You've mentioned that a couple of times, and we're recording this here at the end of August. It'll come out in maybe another 4 or 6 weeks. But the timing of that comment is super interesting. I saw an announcement yesterday, I think, or the day before, that Bank of Australia will not be giving out loans to new gasoline or diesel cars starting in 2025. And so California just yesterday in the US, I think that maybe they announced it prior to yesterday, but they're saying, no new gasoline vehicles in 2035 in California. So although we're sort of talking about two different industries here, I think the topic is really, really important, which is financial institutions restructuring their portfolios, making sure that they're sustainable, and ultimately passing that through to their customers. So the idea of not being able to get a new car loan on a gasoline or diesel vehicle is frankly something that I thought, I didn't, I guess, envision that as being a huge part of the EV adoption, but it's happening, and institutions are starting to talk about that. And you kind of mentioned it earlier. Everybody has a different date. 2025 is obviously a little more aggressive than 2035, but these are really, really important things that are going to really accelerate, the adoption of these technologies. So very, very interesting to hear you talk about that. And thank you for sharing some of that. I certainly had not thought about a farmer, being able to obtain or not obtain a loan based upon how sustainable their farm is. So really, really fascinating concept. I want to shift gears a little bit. On your website, you mentioned agroforestry, and you're focused on agroforestry. So I'll be frank with you. I had not heard that term. I'm very interested. What is agroforestry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you can. I guess it's possible to explain it in different ways. For us, one way is that it's just another option to sequester more carbon, not in the soil but in trees. But more broadly, the agroforestry is combining trees to the farm, so that you are growing trees and crops at the same time, so that your crop production wouldn't be reduced. So you choose those strategic places. Also, it's a good way for animal farmers who are producing animals to grow trees and have some tree rows or some bushes together, or something where animals can go to shade. And it's a really big movement in Europe as well. Agroforestry is something, it's actually not new. It's more like it's natural, because well, it's not natural to have, well, it depends on region, but to have those really big fields. It seems efficient, and in a way it is efficient, but then the wind erosion is coming, and but there are some, like, it's still something, it's new. The research on agroforestry is very new. So how it will actually influence the yields and so on, because let's say you plant the tree line. So what are the negative things? It takes some water away and some nutrients away. Depending on the region, there's some shade, so you have less sunlight. It might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the region. In Estonia, it's a very bad thing. If you have a shade, the snow is melting away later, and so on. But then there are some positive things as well. So roots may get nutrients from the bottom, from deeper levels, and bring it up, and then leaves are spreading it around. It might be that the shade is a good thing in some region. It might also be that wind block is good for your animal health, but also might be good for your crop health. So these are the things we are currently researching and trying to set up some pilots to understand how it would be best and most efficient to grow trees and crops together. And some of those trees might also be like fruit trees or nut trees, so farmers can also get the food production out of it.
Yeah, and I think you touch on something there that's super important to highlight, which is really that every farm is different, and depending on where you are in the world, in the region, what type of soil you have, the climate, every farm is different, and so there isn't this sort of one size fits all approach, that you can apply to farming, and you really have to look at all of the different components of the farm, from soil to, of course, climate, and et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that was really interesting, and it sounds like a space where eAgronom has potential to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And another aspect maybe is also that, well, depending obviously where the animal farms are, but if they're in the region where you can also grow some trees, then that's probably the only way to actually reach net zero animal production, because even if we capture the methane, there is still some emissions involved in animal growing, and then this might be a good way to capture those emissions as well. But yeah, for us, well, let's see. We have several, we have a small science center inside the eAgronom that is researching several ways how to sequester more carbon in farming land, and bringing those opportunities to farmers, and then bringing those economic benefits also. So our job is to develop the environment in a way that then farmers can pick their own solutions and put it together, and benefit from it.
Very interesting. As we prepared for the episode, we talked about food security, which is a topic that we like to cover here on the podcast. How does eAgronom fit in when we talk about food security?
Yeah, I guess, well, main thing is if you take good care of your soil, then you are much less influenced by the weather and extreme weather conditions as well. Let's say if it's too dry. Actually, I spoke like few years ago with someone from American Agriculture Ministry or something like this. And in certain states, if you grow undercrops, so some undercrop below the main crop, then the soil temperature is lower because you have shade over there. And it's super important in some regions if there is a long dry period without any rain, that can make a really big difference. Also, if you have more humus in the soil, when it's really heavy rain periods, then you can it's like a water bank. So you don't have the floating water on top of your field, but it can actually absorb it. And then if you have the long dry periods, you can access this as well. So that's the main thing, I guess. If you apply those regenerative practices, and if eAgronom helps to apply them, then we have less, farmers are less influenced by the extreme weather.
And tell me a little bit about the role of technology in that, in ensuring good soil health and therefore boosting yields and protecting against extreme conditions and all the things you just discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a way, you cannot influence something if you cannot measure it. Or at least it's difficult to get all the farmers to influence something if they cannot measure it. And I think this is where the technology has biggest impact, is in measuring and showing the feedback to farmers. If you do this, this is the result. If you do that, then that's the result and impact to the soil. Obviously, and that's something that we are mainly focusing and working with. But then obviously, if you would ask the same question from the CEO of John Deere, then they are using technology to then already now develop direct drilling solutions and precision fertilization solutions and other technologies as well that are very helpful as well. But from our standpoint, what we see as a first step is measuring and actually giving the feedback to farmers. Okay, what are the impacts of their different practices?
Absolutely. It's one question we hear a lot from farmers with respect to our fertilizer. How do we know it's going to work? And
Yeah.
we've been doing a lot of field trials to try to show them data. And sometimes those help. Sometimes they say, well, I'm just going to try it and I'll let you know if it works. And so, but absolutely being able to measure and verify improvements or not is so key to, further pushing the adoption of these regenerative farming practices. This has been such a great episode. I just have a few more questions as we start to wrap up. Who are and talk about some of the key partnerships that you've been able to sort of lever to enable your success?
Yeah, few things. So I guess we are working, maybe even the biggest partners are our dealers. Farming, I think no big agribusiness is selling directly to farmers. And in few markets, we started doing it on our own as well. And let's say in Poland and Estonia and Latvia, we have developed extremely good relationships with farmers on our own. But to grow like pan-Europe and globally later as well, you need strong partners. Farming is very relationship-based business, and changing practices requires a lot of trust from a person. And over there, we are relying on partners who are already have developed that kind of trust. Like in Lithuania, for example, another European Union country, our partner is John Deere, local John Deere dealer. In Romania, it's local Well, actually, we have two partners over there. Both are farmer unions. In some other country, it can be a local advisory component, etc. So these are one of the key partners we have, and then working with some other technology partners as well. For example, integrating with John Deere to get some data from their machines, then with some satellite providers, because we are not doing everything on our own, but trying to put all the technologies together.
It's very interesting. I've been really fascinated to learn over the course of the last few years just how much data the companies, some of these companies you mentioned, John Deere and others, are collecting off of their equipment, and how savvy the farmers are in interpreting and using that data. I think it's super interesting and something that I think we'll continue to see grow in farming practices across the world. What do you think is your biggest challenge as you look forward?
The biggest challenge, there are so many small pieces to put together. And okay, we can put together, but how to make it as simple as is driving the tractor. Tractor is also like very complex if you go inside, and especially right now with all those sensors and etc. But it's really easy to drive it. And that's the kind of feeling we want to have for our farmers as well. So that joining a carbon program would be as easy and like a very straightforward experience for them. But at the same time, we don't want to lower our standards. We want to make sure that the credits we create are still high value and according to the highest standards. So basically putting those two things together, having it easy and simple, but then complex inside, that's the biggest challenge that we have.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a great episode. I'm fascinated by your company, and I really am looking forward to following along with your growth. Tell our listeners and viewers how they can connect with you or follow along with your company online.
Yeah, well, we have a website, eAgronom.com. It's also possible to find us from LinkedIn. It's a small company. We have 80 people, 80. So it's possible to write directly to me as well, either via LinkedIn or just robin@eagronom.com.
Fabulous. This has been another episode of Renewables with Robin Saluoks from eAgronom. Robin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, I hope we can stay in touch. I certainly look forward to following your company as you continue to grow, and really appreciate you making the time today.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right. Well, thank you also to our listeners and viewers who continue to tune in to the podcast. I'm your host, David Smart, Senior Vice President of Sales at BioStar Renewables, and this has been another episode of Renewables, a sustainability podcast. Thanks again to Robin, and thanks to our listeners and viewers. Thank you for clicking that follow button so that you don't miss an episode in the future. We have a lot of great episodes coming up here through the end of the year, so really, really appreciate everyone tuning in. All right, Robin, have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for listening to Renewables, a podcast by BioStar, which aims to explore the current and future energy landscape in America.